This next function can be pretty handy, especially whenever you're dealing with a large data set, large number of animals, a large amount of information that you want to pick out just a couple of key things. Actually, this video is going to talk about the counts, like the count if blank, things of that nature. The next video will talk about sum and sum if and sum ifs, and both of those are really handy if you're dealing with a large data set and trying to pick out key information. So let's kind of dive into it, shall we? So right now we have, let's say that we have a hypothetical sheep herd, and in this hypothetical sheep herd we have quite a few sheep. You know, we can kind of scroll down and we see that these numbers, they range all the way down to 350. But as we kind of look through them, we say, all right, well, there's no 347, no 345. There is no, and as we go through here, there are some that are skipped, like 330, 331. So we can't just get an accurate number of exactly how many are in here based off of the tag number. So what we're going to use instead is an equals count. So an equals count function is going to count, as it says here, count the number of numeric values in a data set. So what count does is it goes through and it says how many of these values are truly numbers. So if we go through and we kind of start up here, or as you can kind of see right here, it shows like the number 0. We already have one cell highlighted, but that's a text. It's a word, it's not a number, so it shows up as a 0. But as we begin on cell A7, where the numbers start, then we actually begin to start counting up the number of numbers, basically. And that's what we're going to do. So we're just going to go all the way down here to the bottom, to the end of our data, and we press enter. And what it did is it counted up the total number of sheep. So here we're just counting up what we did in that formula is we just counted up what was the total number of sheep. Now, for this next aspect is we want to count, now we want to dive into a little bit more information. We want to count, first and foremost, the number of sheep that had 3 lambs, had over 2 lambs. So in order to do this, we're going to use what is known as the count if function. So we're going to say equals count if, and with this count if formula, we are going to be counting up the number of sheep that had lambs or had more than 3 lambs. So we're going to be looking at this column right here where it's talking about the number of lambs. So we're just going to highlight all of the information in this column. We're just going to scroll all the way down. And in the next part of this count if, after we have all of the range highlighted, we're going to do column, and it's now asking for the criterion. That criterion, same kind of stuff as what we were dealing with, like the sort and the sort in. We're going to be looking at, well, what are we trying to gauge this by? And what we're going to do is I'm going to scroll all the way up here to the top, and what I'm trying to do is I'm going to try and count the number of lambs, or the number of ewes that had lambs more than 2 lambs. Because if they had more than 2, that obviously means that they had 3. So we're going to do open quotations, the greater than sign, 2, close quotations, close parenthesis, and then enter. So it shows up as 3. And if we go through and we count the number of lambs that had 3, or number of ewes that had 3 lambs, we'll find out that there is exactly 3 of them in there. And I'm not going to go through each one and count, but whenever you're doing this assignment, go through and see if you can count and find the 3 lambs that had at least 3 ewes, or had all 3 ewes. So that's a count if. And in the count if, we're going to highlight the range and then put that criterion, and that criterion typically goes in quotation marks. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the count ifs. So what if we want to find the number of sheep that had at least 2 lambs, so it had basically 2 to 3 lambs, and is younger than 4 years old. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to put in 2 criterion, which means we need to use the count ifs. And the difference between count if is that a count if is a conditional count across a range, whereas the count ifs is the count values depending on multiple criteria. So because we're dealing with multiple criteria, first and foremost the number of lambs and the age, we're going to use that count ifs. So that first one we're going to be dealing with is we're counting the number of sheep that had at least 2 lambs. So we're going to highlight this whole column again. And we are going to say our criterion is that they have to be greater than 1 lamb. They had to have had greater than 1 lamb. And we can see it already shows us a little bit of an answer, and we're seeing that that answer is equal to 134. So there were 134 lambs that had at least 1 lamb, or 134 ewes that had at least 1 lamb. Our second criterion is that they're younger than 4 years old. So next we're going to be dealing with the birth year. And we highlight all the birth year. And we want to be younger than 4 years old. It's currently 2018. So if they were born on or after, let me see how I got this worded. And the way I'd like to do it is that they're younger than 4 years old. So if they are born on or after 2015, then they're going to be 3 years old or younger than 4 years old. So our criterion right here is that they would have had to be born greater than 2015 in order for them to fall into that younger than 4 years old, but yet still had more than 1 lamb. And if we press enter, we see that only 37 of those sheep fall into that category. And if you really wanted to, you could go through and say and highlight all of those individual lambs that fit that category. But why would you want to do that whenever you have the computer already count it for you? Now the last thing we want to know is we want to know how many lamb or how many ewes didn't even lamb at all. How many of them were open? So if we look through our list, we can see that all of these ones that are blank, well, obviously they haven't lambed or they didn't lamb. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this count blank. And what this count blank does is it counts the number of cells that are blank. So if we go through and we just highlight this whole column, and we're going to work all the way down to the bottom, we highlight that whole column and press enter, we see that 17 ewes did not lamb at all. We had 200 lambs overall, 3 of which had at least 3 lambs. 37 of them had at least 2 lambs, were younger than 4 years old, and 17 of them didn't even lamb at all. So what we're going to do is, instead of going through and manually counting all these, we'll use these count functions to really sort that data, to really find out information on that data in a quick and easy format.